Muted and will remain so until the question and answer period, when you will be able to unmute them and ask your question, or you can type it into the chat box if you prefer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. We have a few more people who plan to join us, but I want to make sure that we give Anne the full amount of time that we've agreed to provide today. So I want to go ahead and welcome everyone to today's presentation in Zoomtime Knowledge. If this is your first time attending, this is a free public lecture series made available by the James Madison University Lifelong Learning Institute. I have the pleasure of serving as director of the program. My name is Rodney Wolfenbarger. I'm joined by Sue G. Sue is our program assistant, and she actually will be managing today's technology. If you have any problems, feel free to leave her a comment in the chat window. She'll be able to assist you. And I'm also joined by our special guest presenter and a longtime friend of the program, and Dr. Anne Henriksen. Anne is not just a frequent contributor, a content contributor to our program. She's done this lecture presentation, a different presentation in this format before, but she's also an active LLI member. So she's both a student and a teacher, and I love the way that you model what our program represents. It is a love of learning and embracing learning across the life course. Today's presentation is titled Your Brain on Strings, the Physics and Biology of Making and Hearing Music with a String Instrument. I want to provide a quick introduction to Anne. She may provide other details, but for those of you that do not know Dr. Henriksen, she is faculty emerita at James Madison University, where she was a professor in integrated science and technology for 19 years. Anne received a PhD in chemical physics from the University of Virginia and an MBA in management science from the University of New Mexico. She has spent the last decade studying neuroscience, genomics, and bioinformatics. Anne, welcome. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you. I'll spotlight your video, and after your opening remarks, we will stand by as you prepare your screen sharing.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. I appreciate it. I just want to thank Rodney for everything he does for me to enable my teaching and improve my teaching in this format. I don't know what I would do without him. He sits here and listens to me for an hour before we actually do one of these talks. He's given me phenomenal training, and Sue for her administrative assistance. It's just a wonderful way to be able to connect with people in these very difficult times. I also want to say that I didn't think of this until recently, but my very first ukulele class was at LLI with Sandy. And some of the people in that group are here today in the audience and are members of the Shenandoah Valley Ukulele Players with me. So I owe LLI a great debt for getting me into music when I retired. So thank you for that. And rumor has it that those classes will start up again once we can resume in person, that we will be bringing back ukulele again. So I want to thank all of you for joining me today. This is such an honor. It really, really is, to have so many people here that I know and some I don't. And I hope that I can enrich your musical experience today with what I talk about. It is not an exaggeration to say that this talk represents the trifecta of the most meaningful and passionate intellectual interests that I have: physics, biology, and music. And so to be able to share this with you is an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. And I will stay afterwards, even after the meeting is over, for anybody that might have questions. I don't have any place I have to rush off to. So even when it's officially over, I'm happy to stick around and answer anybody's questions. So what I want to do now is share my screen. And I'm going to share my screen and start up the PowerPoints. And there you have my computer screen. And I'm going to also pin my own video so that I just have to look at myself. Okay, so let's get started. So the name of this talk is Your Brain on Strings, the Physics and Biology of Making and Hearing String Music. I was inspired to do this talk because I have taken up music since I retired. And I don't know if you recognize the picture of me in the background, but in the background of my initial video with when I was spotlighted is my music studio. It's behind me now. That's a photograph actually of my music studio, my recording studio, where I record music, practice music, and compose music. And so I was led to do this because of my interest in physics and relating that to music. And it's turned out to be an interesting combination. Now, I want to point out that guitar in the upper left-hand corner there. That's actually a Martin. That guitar cost $80,000. I'm not really sure what an $80,000 guitar would bring. I'd love to play it just to find out the answer to that question. Okay, so in this talk, we will talk about the following things. We will talk about what exactly is sound. What are the properties of a sound wave? We'll talk about what is musical pitch. We'll talk about how do string instruments create musical sound. What features of a string instrument determine pitch? Now, pitch is like high versus low. So pitch is about the high or low of the note. Then we're going to check out a couple of really neat string instruments. We're going to actually check out harpsichords, pianos, and vocal cords. We're going to then move on to the biology part of the talk. And we're going to talk about how do our ears hear the pitch and volume of music. Then we'll talk about how does musical sound make its journey to our brain. And we'll talk about what parts of your brain perceive and interpret music. And then we'll talk about how do age and gender influence how we hear sound. Okay? So what exactly is sound? Sound is a vibrational pressure wave that forcefully disturbs the air molecules around us. And that vibrational pressure wave is what travels to our ears. Now, I will cover that in detail in this talk, so we'll get a lot more about that. Sound is also a sensation that is detected by our ears and interpreted by our brain. It can be very simple, like that, or it can be very complicated, like that. And sound is also a potentially powerful force that can evoke deep emotion, memories, and behavior. And this is demonstrated beautifully by people who have demential diseases like Alzheimer's, where they may not know what they had for breakfast this morning, but they will remember songs from their childhood. Music gets embedded in our brains. And I don't know if you've ever watched Michael J. Fox play the guitar, but even though Michael J. Fox has had Parkinson's, early onset Parkinson's, since he was in his late 20s, he can still play Johnny B. Good with Coldplay, and it is a beauty to watch. Okay, so sound requires a medium to be created and to travel. If you don't have that medium, you can't make sound. Sound requires a medium. So without air, sound as we know it would not exist for us. Without air, there would be no molecules to compress and expand in response to a vibrating force that makes sound. Without a medium, the forces that create sound waves have no way to travel. So air is our sound medium. Sound cannot transmit in a vacuum, like in outer space. So astronauts can scream at each other all they want from outside the space station, but it ain't going anyplace. On the other hand, light does not require a medium to travel, and that's one of the unique properties of light and how it differs from sound. Light does not require a medium. So light can transmit in outer space, which is why we see stars. We can see stars because light travels. That's a very cool property of light, by the way. And the speed of light is a constant in outer space. The speed of light does not vary like the speed of sound. The speed of a sound wave depends on the medium. Sound speed underwater is different than sound speed at atmospheric level, which is different than sound wave speed when you get higher up, like in the mountains. Because when you affect the medium, you affect the speed at which sound travels. And also, speed of sound depends on temperature. Because temperature affects how the air molecules will move around under the force of the pressure wave. So all simple sound waves have three fundamental quantities. First, the sound wave has its wavelength. So what is a wavelength? It's also known as a cycle. And if that's a traveling sound wave, one cycle would be like from there to there. So in that space, the sound wave creates one complete cycle. Notice it goes down and then up. You could, that's called an oscillation, or one complete oscillation. You could also measure, by the way, you could measure wavelength from peak to peak, but that would have to be the same. Now, frequency, on the other hand, is related to wavelength. They're kind of inversely related. But frequency has to do with how many sound waves are transmitted in a second. So if we have these two sound waves, and we note this as 1 second, if we count the number of sound waves, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 complete sound waves there in 1 second. We would call that a 4 cycles in 1 second. And the physics term for 4 complete wave cycles in 1 second is 4 hertz. Hertz, it means cycle per second. On the other hand, if we have that exact same 1 second over here for this sound wave, in that sound wave only has 1 complete cycle in 1 second. So that sound wave has a cycle of 1 hertz. Why does this matter? In music, everything is about frequency. We don't often use that term in music, but that's what it's about. Pitch is about frequency. And the shorter the frequency, the more the frequency, the longer the wavelength. They're inversely related. So as you can see in this picture over here, this wavelength is longer than this wavelength. So you get more cycles per second over here than you would get over here. The last property of a sound wave is its speed. Now, sound waves travel at approximately 769 miles per hour, or 344 meters per second if you're a person who likes meters. And just to give you a contrast or a sense of that, the cruising speed of a Boeing 737 is 583 miles per hour. So that's why military jets can break the sound barrier, because military jets can fly faster than 769 miles an hour. But you wouldn't want your Boeing 737 flying faster than 769 miles per hour, or there would be some loud noises at the front end of your Boeing 737. Okay. So this is a video about music and sound. Now, I'm going to take a minute before we start all these videos to slow the speed of the video down. So that will take me a little bit, but the videos are just a few minutes each except for one of them. And so this one is called Music and Sound, the video.
Now let's consider a significantly more complex sound. This sound of Beethoven's Ninth is constructed from dozens of instruments. Each instrument, when played, applies a force to the air particles around it, thus causing the air particles to bounce into one another, thereby generating a sound wave. So when the waveforms of different instruments meet in the air, they combine to make a new, unique waveform or sound. Wait. Let's actually rewind and clarify three quick things. First, this animation properly shows how a sound wave is a sequence of alternating compressions and rarefactions. However, it doesn't show how sound propagates in all directions. It propagates kind of like this, as an expanding sphere. So just keep that in mind. Also, second, with this animation, it looks like the particles are traveling. However, in reality, it is the force of the air particles that is traveling. And this propagation of force, along with the alternating compressions and rarefactions, is what constitutes a sound wave. Take a look at the video how sound travels to better conceptualize this bouncing-like movement of air particles. And finally, third, this sound waveform is just a quick snapshot of what the entire sound wave looks like. It's about 4/1000 of a second in duration. To say it differently, there would be 440 of these waveforms hitting your ear in 1 second. Or to say it technically, the frequency of this violin sound is 440 hertz. Or to say it musically, it is a musical note A.
Now, I want to.
So now that we have those details clarified, let's jump back to where we were. So when the waveforms of different instruments meet in the air, they combine to make a new, unique waveform or sound. With simple combinations of instruments, our brain is able to analyze this combined waveform and pick out individual instruments. However, when many instruments are combined, only a trained ear would be able to determine all the instruments used to create the music, because the combined new waveform is so dissimilar to the individual instruments.
So I want to stop and mention something about this video. It used 440 hertz, which in our universe is actually the concert pitch that the first violinist plays when the first violinist gets up in front of the symphony and they all tune their instruments. It is the sound standard against which all the instruments that we use are tuned. So a piano is tuned at A4 equals 440 hertz, and everything else is tuned, and the octave is tuned in relation to that. It hasn't always been this way in the music world. There wasn't always an organized strategy for tuning things, but we use a system now called equal temperament. And so tuning is a very exact science that involves some kind of absolute standard, and the absolute standard is A440 hertz. Sound has three very important properties. And when I say sound here, I'm talking about the sound associated with music. The first one is pitch. Pitch is how high or low the sound is. Whether it's high, ah, or here, ah, that's pitch. Then it has a volume, that is how loud or soft the sound is. And third, timbre. Timbre is the color of sound, how unique the color of sound is. It is timbre of each individual instrument that helps us distinguish the guitar from the ukulele, from the oboe, from the flute, and from the drum. And we'll talk about all of these things in detail. So pitch is determined by the frequency of the vibrations. And that's why it's so important to understand frequency if you want to understand music. So this is one particular frequency of vibration, and this is another one, and this is another one. Now let's say this was 1 second across the board. You can see that the image on the left has a frequency of 1 hertz, the image on the middle has a frequency of 3 hertz, and the image on the right has 7 hertz. because that's the number of complete oscillations in 1 second. Now your ears hear this such like this. This one is lower and this one is higher. Okay, so frequency determines pitch. Now I have this representation of the pitches for a lot of instruments. And this, starts here: cymbals, snare, bass, cello, piano. And I want to point out a few things about this picture. First of all, this is the scale of frequencies that human beings can hear. Over here we have 20 hertz, and that's about as low as our ears can hear, 20 cycles per second. And this is 20,000 hertz, about as high a frequency as our ears can hear. And if you go to the store and you buy headphones for your instrument, for your iPod or your music on your cell telephone, you will look at where the range where those headphones can hear, and it'll usually say the lowest, which can be anywhere from 5 hertz to 15 hertz to 20 hertz, up to the highest, 20,000 hertz. So this is the range that your ears can hear over, low to high. Now a piano fits smack in the middle of this. This is the piano. This is the lowest note on the piano over here. I will circle it right here. This is the lowest note in the piano right here. And this is the highest note on the piano right here. Now, if this were a Bosendorf or Imperial, there would be notes all the way down here too, but this is not a Bosendorf or Imperial. Grand. So the scale of the piano runs from about 28 hertz up to about 4,200. Now, this is a pipe organ. Interestingly, a pipe organ has a range of frequencies much greater than a piano. It runs from about 20 hertz up to about 8,000 hertz. So pipe organs get very lows, and they get highs that are higher than a piano. On the other hand, a harpsichord is much shorter frequency range than either a piano or an organ. It only runs from about 44 hertz up to about 1,600 hertz. And we are going to cover harpsichords and pianos a little bit later in this talk. Now, if you play the bass guitar or the bass ukulele, I now play the bass ukulele and also the bass guitar, you will know the lowest string on a standard bass is right there. It's the lowest E on a piano. But if you're a rock musician, you might buy a 5-string bass, and that would make its lowest note a B down there. So you can buy a 5-string bass, and you can even buy a 6-string bass, which has higher notes than the traditional bass. So that's the range of frequencies that people can hear. Dogs can hear beyond 20,000 hertz. What's interesting is males and females hear different. Women tend to hear high frequencies better, and men tend to hear low frequencies better. And if you think about the logic for this, back on the days of the Serengeti plain, what did women have to hear? They had to hear their babies crying. So they better be able to hear high frequency. And men had to hear the lions and the tigers in their guttural low sounds out on the plain, or they would have gotten eaten if they couldn't hear them, and they would not have been able to pass on their progeny. So men hear low frequency better than women in general. Now, the loudness of a sound is determined by the amplitude of the vibrations. What does that mean? So these are 3 vibrations, the lowest pitch on the left and the highest pitch on the right. And it has a certain amplitude that is the mid of the structure of the wave to the peak. Now, here's a note that has 3 notes that have exactly the same frequency. But notice how the amplitude is higher. The notes on the bottom are louder. So even if this were the same note, the one on the top would be softer and the one on the bottom would be louder. This is as if you hit middle C on the piano lightly on the top versus middle C on the piano hard on the bottom, because pianos can express volume. Same frequency, higher amplitude, louder sound. Now, the last topic is a beautiful topic, because timbre is what music is all about. If every musical instrument sounded identical, it would be pretty boring. What makes music beautiful is that every instrument has its own timbre. And when you combine those together, you get a beautiful sound that is the superposition of all the instrument timbres together. So you don't just superimpose frequency when you play musical instruments together, you also superimpose the timbre of each individual one. And it is that combination of their timbres that gives music its flavor and its beauty. So these are three of my instruments. That is my bamboo ukulele on the left, my Taylor GS mini guitar in the middle, and my Kauai CA58 in there. And that's the one that's out in the dining room. And over here we have a tuning fork. Now, these instruments have different timbre. Obviously, they have different physical properties. A larger body for a guitar gives it a much broader and richer timbre than a ukulele. So what did I do? I went and recorded in my studio 3 sounds. I recorded the sound of the A 440 hertz on the ukulele. I recorded 440 hertz on the guitar, and I recorded 440 hertz on the piano. And you can see even the wave patterns look different. So let's listen to the ukulele. That's a sweet little sound, but you can tell it doesn't have a lot of body to it, but it's a sweet sound. Now here's that same note on the guitar. And here's that same note on the piano. Notice the timbre difference of all of them. The guitar has a richer sound, and that's because the vibrations that are created when you pluck a guitar string can bounce around inside the body and result in a richer, deeper sound. Now, in a minute, we're going to talk about overtones and harmonics, and the important thing is to remember that bodies of instruments and cavities for pianos, when you play a grand and you hit those strings and you play the inside of a grand, sound bounces around inside these instruments. And the frequency isn't just the single frequency that's created inside the instrument. And it's that quality of the instrument that gives the unique timbre of each instrument. So I have a video now called Timbre the Video. Now this is a 5-minute video, but I think it's worth it. If you are a musician, particularly a string musician, and you've always kind of wondered, does the wood matter? Why do I change my strings? Should I change my strings? Does it matter if I have old strings? This video will talk a little bit about all of that. It will also talk about overtones and harmonics. Now, I want to first explain that the word node in a frequency spectrum, it's the place where there's in the middle where the waves have no amplitude at all. So nodes are where there's no amplitude. So we'll need to remember that for this video.
Hey, Anne.
Yes.
While you're setting up this video, one quick change. Can you slightly increase the line volume of your computer using those master controls, please? And it's just in the lower right-hand corner where you upped the volume before we started.
Here?
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully it wasn't too.
When you pluck the ice.
No, I'm going to stop and slow this video down too. This is really important that this video be a little bit slower. It's too fast even for Anne.
When you pluck the A string on a guitar, it vibrates back and forth 110 times per second, or at 110 hertz. The vibration is then passed on to the hollow body of the guitar, which vibrates at the same rate as the string and amplifies the sound. But when you pluck the string, it doesn't just vibrate back and forth at that one frequency. Actually, it vibrates at many different frequencies all at the same time, the lowest of which is 110 Hz. And this is called the fundamental frequency. To get a string to vibrate only at its fundamental frequency, you would need to start it off in a perfectly curved shape. In practice, this is impossible, and you generally pluck a string by creating a kink in it, either with a pick or your finger. When you let go, the various parts of the string are pulled back towards their equilibrium. They overshoot and then start vibrating in lots of different ways simultaneously. But because the string is fixed at both ends, it can only vibrate in multiples of the fundamental frequency. So the whole length of the string vibrates at the fundamental frequency of 110 Hz, and this is called the first harmonic. The string also vibrates in halves at 220 Hz, and this is the second harmonic or the first overtone. The string also vibrates in thirds at 330 Hz, which is the third harmonic or the second overtone, and it vibrates in quarters at 440 Hz, which is the fourth harmonic or third overtone, and so on. And in theory, this process goes on indefinitely, so you have an infinite amount of harmonics. And this is called the overtone series or the harmonic series, and it's the basis of how we structure music, as we'll discover over the next few videos. So all the overtones are just multiples of the fundamental frequency. And there's a direct relationship between the length of a string and the frequency at which it vibrates. If you halve the length of the string, you double its frequency. Here repeats 110 times every second. This is because in the time that the fundamental frequency completes one full cycle, the first overtone completes 2 full cycles, the second overtone completes 3 full cycles, and so on. So the entire pattern repeats at 110 Hz, or at the fundamental frequency, and all the overtones just make the wave shape more complex. So the fundamental frequency determines the pitch of the note, and all the overtones just support and complement the fundamental frequency to create a more complex and richer sound. Now, we don't hear the overtones as separate notes, but we do hear them. They are what give each instrument its unique sound. An instrument's overtones determine its timbre. The reason a violin sounds different to a guitar, which sounds different to a piano, which sounds different to a saxophone, even when they're all playing the same note, is because they produce notes which contain different mixes of these harmonics. For example, playing a note on a violin sounds the fundamental frequency, backed up by the second, fourth, and eighth harmonics. Whereas playing a note on a flute sounds mostly the second harmonic, backed up by the fundamental and third harmonic. Now, this is also why 2 violins sound different. The strings on all violins are all pretty much standard. But as we learned in the previous lesson, the wooden body of a stringed instrument amplifies the vibration of the string. And no 2 pieces of wood are the same. Wood can come from different trees, have different densities, be different ages, have different tree ring patterns, or be carved to different thicknesses. And all these factors may cause a particular piece of wood to be more responsive to certain harmonics over others. So one violin may favor certain harmonics, while another violin may emphasize different harmonics. and therefore their sound will be different. This also explains why the same guitar string sounds different if you pick it in different places. The fundamental frequency always stays the same, but plucking the string in different places will create different proportions of overtones. The second and fourth harmonics have a node, that is, a point that doesn't move, right in the middle of the string. So if you pluck the string right in the middle, you'll hear the fundamental frequency and the third harmonic, but you will not hear the second or fourth harmonic, precisely because the middle of the string is moving and therefore cannot be a node. And if you pluck a string a third of the way down, you hear the fundamental second and fourth harmonic, but not the third, for the same reason. And this is also the reason why new strings sound different to old strings. A used, worn, and damaged string no longer vibrates perfectly symmetrically. It thus becomes quieter, and the notes can even become a little bit vague. It begins making more of a noise rather than a note because it's no longer creating regular repeating wave patterns, and its overtones are a little bit distorted.
Okay, so that's a discussion of instrument timbre. So now we're going to move on to look, and this is the coolest video. It was taken by a gentleman with his cell phone on high density, and it's a close-up of his guitar strings, and you'll get to see the vibrations of the guitar strings. That's the coolest thing ever. So what things about a specific string instrument create its musical pitch? The exact note you hear when you pluck the string or run the bow over a string. What things contribute to that pitch? Well, there are 4 basic things. The first one is the scale length of the instrument, the tension on the string, the diameter of the string, and the density of the string material. So this is my guitar, and this guitar is a short people's guitar. It has a short scale length for people with short arms. And from here to here is 23.5 inches. That is the scale length, where it crosses over that nut to where it goes over the bridge. It's bound at those 2 ends. Now, that's the fundamental on this guitar, right? That's the fundamental right there. Or this would be a harmonic. This would be another harmonic. And all those things will happen if you pluck the guitar right about over the sound hole. Now, there's another harmonic. But really, in reality, just based on the past video that we've seen, this is pretty much how a lot of the vibrations look on an instrument, more or less like that. Now, if we have a 7-hump vibration, I'm just going to call this a 7-hump vibration here, that goes from one end of the scale length to the other end of the scale length. But then we decide to put our finger on a fret. I think that's the 9th fret right there. Then what we do is we shorten the scale length. So putting your finger on a fret essentially shortens the scale length. So if we have a 7-hump vibration now, notice that 7-hump vibration has a shorter wavelength and a higher frequency. That's by putting your finger on a fret. Makes a higher pitch. You're basically shortening the scale length. If we put our finger right there, dead center on the string, that's the 12th fret of a guitar and the 12th fret of a ukulele, we are basically halving the scale length. So that scale length is half of the scale length of the entire instrument. Now, if that's going to basically double the frequency. So that would be 1 octave. So if this string here is an E, then this one will be E 1 octave higher. Now, if you buy an expensive instrument, one of the most important tests you can do if you buy an instrument is to test for the intonation where the frequency is supposed to double. In a really good instrument, if this is an E string and you put your finger there, this should be E an octave higher, exactly. If it's not, you need to get your wrench out and straighten a few things out in the instrument, or you maybe shouldn't buy that one. And when I was buying bass ukes, I was testing the intonation on the bass ukes, and a couple of them weren't so good, and I ended up sending them back. So if you put the 7 humps there, you're going to get a frequency that is exactly double that frequency of the full scale length. And again, that's an important test for an instrument that you purchase. It's called testing the intonation. Okay, so this is some comparisons of scale lengths of instruments, and the 3 on the left are actually instruments from my studio. You can see the little teeny weeny ukulele behind me on the wall up there. That is my sopranissimo ukulele, and in Italian, issimo means the most of. So pianissimo is the softest, and fortissimo is the loudest, and sopranissimo is the tiniest ukulele. And this has a scale length of just over 11 inches. This is what you'd buy for your 2-year-old grandchild if you wanted to introduce them to an instrument. It's available on Amazon. For me, it's a wall decoration. This is my ukulele. It's a Alvarez acoustic electric bamboo, and that has a scale length, and it's a tenor. So it's the biggest of the regular ukuleles. It has a scale length of 17 inches. This is my Taylor GS Mini. It has a scale length of 23.5. That's a short people's guitar, or people with short arms. It's called a parlor guitar or a travel guitar or a 3/4 size. And this is a standard, this is a Fender. It has a standard scale length of about 25.5 inches. Okay, the next thing that affects pitch is tension. And of course, if you're an instrument player, you know that the way you fix tension, the way you tune tension on an instrument is you just tune the turning pegs. And when you turn those tuning pegs, it will tighten or loosen the instrument, and then you'll be able to hone in on exactly the correct frequency. And if you have a really good tuner for your instrument, it'll tell you what your frequency of the vibration is that you're getting. And if you have A and it's showing 435, that's not what you want. You need to tweak that little tuning peg till you get exactly 440 for A4 on the piano. And I think on this thing, I don't know where A4 is here, but you would want exactly the right frequency. And a really good tuner will tell you how many frequency hertz your tuning is off. I have a tuner like that. And this is my Alvarez acoustic electric bamboo, and what is really cool about bamboo, and I want to talk about this because it's so cool, is bamboo is not a wood. Bamboo is a grass. Bamboo is the thing that panda bears eat. And the way you make an instrument with bamboo is you glue together strips of the grass. And if you look at this carefully, you can see the striations that are actually strips of bamboo glued together. It has a sweet, majestic sound with beautiful intonation and resonance. Now this instrument, my instrument, is strung with basically fishing line. Fluorocarbon is one of the things you can string a ukulele with. It is nothing more than fishing line. And mine is strung with a low G. Now, that means that All of the strings on this instrument are identical. That means the density of the strings is identical. It has the same scale length because it's my same ukulele. But how do I get a lower note for a low G versus a higher note for a high A? Well, you have to increase the diameter of the string because a larger diameter will give you a lower note. So this G right here is this low G. Now, a lot of ukuleles, most ukuleles, traditional ukuleles, are strung with a high G here, which would be the G up here. But if you like to pick or you like the sound of a deeper note in your strum, you can get your ukulele strung with a low G. Over here, this is A. This is A4 on the piano right here. And notice how much fatter this string is than this. And these are both fishing line. So I accomplished getting a lower note over here with a fatter string. The last thing that determines the pitch of a string is the density of the string material. Now on the left here is my Fender Squier Mini P bass, which is an electric bass with a passive pickup. It's also a short people's bass. It's what's called a mini, but it's a real bass. And on the right is my ukulele bass, and that's also a bass. Now the notes on these instruments are identical. That's the lowest E, and then it goes up E, A, D, G. So the notes that these make are identical. This, of course, sounds like an electric guitar, right? Sounds just like an electric guitar, electric bass. But this over here actually, interestingly, sounds like an upright bass. It has that tone, that timbre of an upright bass. Why is that the case? So these are the instruments close up. On the left is the Fender. Now, remember I told you that this E note is exactly the same as that E note, but look at how much fatter that string is. Why do I need a fat string over there? Well, on a short scale length, you can't just put one of these strings or it would sag. And how do they accomplish that? They make the strings out of different material. This is metal wrapped around metal, which is a standard electric guitar string. This, however, is polyurethane. It's actually a very high density, well-made plastic, and it has a different sound than this string over here. And look how much fatter it has to be to get exactly the same note that you get over here. And that's because this is less dense. Polyurethane is not as dense as metal. If you had a ball of metal in your left hand, this kind of thing in your left hand, and a ball exactly the same size in your right hand of this would weigh so much more. So when you need to get lower notes on an instrument, sometimes you have to have different material, which is why a 6-string guitar that has nylon strings on the bottom 3 will often have metal strings on the other 3. Because if you made them strings so fat, you couldn't even fit them on a guitar. So it'll change from nylon to metal wrapped nylon. Okay, so all else being equal, the longer the string, the lower the note, the looser the string, the lower the note, the fatter the string, the lower the note, and the denser the string, the lower the note. And of course, the reverse is also true. So next, I want to talk about 2 interesting things. I bet you never thought of it. We're going to talk about pianos and harpsichords, and then we're going to talk about vocal cords. Now, this is an actual real piano. This is a Kauai CR1M 6.5-foot concert grand. It's a real piano. It's called a crystal grand. It sells for a cool $1 million. They only make about 5 of them in Japan. The piano is also a string instrument, but it's not only a string instrument, it's also a percussion instrument. So why is that true? Why is the piano both a string instrument and a percussion instrument at the same time? Well, the reason for that is because the way a piano works is over here, when you press this key with your finger, then pressing down causes a bunch of stuff to happen in this system of pulleys and levers and other things that cause this hammer to go up here and hit that string. Now, once the hammer hits the string, this damper over here falls down and stops the vibration. unless you press the pedal. If you press the pedal of a piano, this damper stays up and the vibration is allowed to sustain. That's how you sustain a piano note. So the default condition is piano note stops, vibration stops. Pressing the foot pedal of the piano, the one on the right usually if you have 3, keeps the damper up and the vibration sustains. It also causes a sympathetic resonance inside the piano with all the other keys that can vibrate at that same frequency. That's why piano sound is so rich. This is an actual real inside of some piano. This is a Kauai. This is the inside of a Kauai grand. You can see here's over here on the right is the piano key. There is the hammer. There is the string it hits, and there is the damper that falls down after the hammer hits the string and makes the string vibrate. And this is the inside guts this is actually another Kauai. This is the inside. You can see all the hammers over here. These are all the 88 hammers, and the damper pedals are down underneath there. Here is the inside of the Steinway Grand. And by the way, JMU, music department, is an all Steinway school. What's interesting about pianos is there's the felt damper right there that falls down on the keys. Now, what's interesting about piano keys, which I think is kind of fascinating, is I got to see the inside, the first time for the inside of a grand the other day at Gary's Pianos here in town, is that for the higher notes, you have to have 3 strings for every note. And then for some of the lower notes, you only have to have 2 strings. But for the really low notes, you only have to have 1 string. And the reason for that is because the higher frequency strings need more strings to make the same volume when you press the key down. Because pianos will be loud if you press hard and soft if you press soft. But to get the same volume equivalent across all the 88 keys, you have to compensate for the fact that the higher frequencies are less loud by having 3 strings for every key. But the low notes, you only need 1 fat string for. So that's why pianos have more strings for high notes than low notes. Now this is interesting. This is a harpsichord. This is actually a replica of the harpsichord that George Washington had made for his step-granddaughter Nellie. And this replica sits in Mount Vernon, and there's actually a professor of music history who plays the harpsichord who will come and play this from time to time. But if you ever go to Mount Vernon, you can see this. It is a stunning instrument. And we said a minute ago that pianos and harpsichords are very different. And the way that harpsichords work is that the strings are not hit with a hammer. They are plucked with a plectrum. So it's like a person's finger plucking a guitar string. A plectrum plucks a harpsichord string. So pianos versus harpsichords. A piano string is hit by a hammer, then damped. A harpsichord string is plucked by a plectrum. Piano sounds can be played loud or soft. Harpsichord sounds only have 1 volume. There's only 1 plucking volume. You can't pluck hard or pluck soft. Piano sounds can be sustained with a foot pedal and caused to resonate with the inside of the piano body. Harpsichords have no similar sustain capability. And furthermore, the piano has 7 octaves, and the harpsichord only has 5. Now, I have found a beautiful piece of music that it's played on both a harpsichord and a piano, and I'll play a little bit of it for you. So this is a Chromatic Fantasia and Fugue in D minor by Bach, and here it is played on the piano. Here it is playing the harpsichord. Some songs just beg to be played on a harpsichord. Another string instrument is your vocal cords. And these green things are your vocal cords. If you place this flat on your larynx, it would sit right there. Those close when you sing or talk, and they open when you breathe. There's a pair of honest to God real vocal cords. So how do male and female vocal cords differ? Vocal cords are basically strings stretched across your larynx that vibrate at a certain frequency, and you can change that frequency with muscle tension. That's how you change the pitch of your voice. Male and female voices differ in both pitch and timbre for exactly the same reasons that ukuleles and guitars differ in pitch and timbre. Male vocal cords have longer scale lengths. They go from 2/3 to 1 inch. Females only go from 1/2 inch to 2/3 of an inch. Larger male larynx forms a larger resonance cavity in which the sound can bounce around and amplify, which is guy voices are usually louder. And male vocal cords are thicker. They have a larger diameter. So my next is, how do our ears hear music? We're going to move on to the biology now. And this is a picture. Here's your ear over here. Here's your ear canal, your eardrum. I want you to pay close attention to this part right here. This is the cochlea right here. The cochlea is here. Up here are the semicircular canals that affect our balance. They don't really have anything to do with hearing. I don't know why nature put them there. But this is your cochlea, and the cochlea is where all the business happens. And it looks kind of like this. Here comes a sound wave into your ear, hitting your eardrum. Okay? Now, I want to play for you a video about how our ears hear. This is only a couple of minutes.
Have you ever wondered how sounds make their way from the source all the way to your brain? Take a trumpet, for instance. When it's played, it makes sound waves in the air. The outer ear catches the waves, which then travel through a narrow passageway called the ear canal. The sound waves reach the eardrum, which is a membrane roughly half the size of a dime. They make the eardrum vibrate, which in turn vibrates 3 tiny bones called the malleus, incus, and stapes. These bones amplify or increase the sound vibrations and send them to the cochlea. The cochlea is shaped like a snail and is the size of a garden pea. It is filled with fluid, and the sound vibrations make this fluid ripple, which creates waves. Hair-like structures called stereocilia sit on top of hair cells and are grouped together as hair cell bundles inside the cochlea. The hair cells inside the cochlea ride these waves, and the hair bundles are moved. The hair bundle on top of the hair cell turns these movements into electrical signals. As the hair bundles are moved, ions rush into the top of the hair cells, causing the release of chemicals at the bottom of the hair cells. The chemicals bind to the auditory nerve cells and create an electrical signal, which travels along the auditory nerve to the brain. Different hair cells respond to different frequencies of sound. The hair cells at the base of the cochlea detect higher pitched sounds, such as a piccolo or flute. The hair cells toward the top of the spiral detect progressively lower pitched sounds, such as a trumpet or trombone. At the very top or apex of the spiral, the hair cells detect the lowest pitch sounds, such as a tuba. The auditory nerve carries the electrical signal to the brain, which interprets the messages as sounds that we recognize and understand.
Okay, so next I want to do a little exercise here where I take the cochlea and I'm going to unwrap it for you. So now we're just going to spread it all out. Now remember, there's fluid inside there. So this is the part nearest the eardrum, and this is the part at the apex. Now, when you stretch the cochlea out like this, you can map frequency to a position in the cochlea. High pitches are detected right there, and low pitches are detected at the end. And in the middle is about 1500 hertz. So it's not a linear mapping. Now, below the cochlea is the organ of Corti. And that's where those cells are that have the cilia on top that wave when the wave around when the wave from the sound hits the cochlea. And when these wave around, they send a signal down little fibers of nerve. And those little fibers of nerve coalesce into the cochlear nerve. And they make their way to the brain. Now, I want to make sure you understand that music is sound waves detected by your ear, but it isn't actually music until it gets into your brain. Because all your ears do is get the sensation, but brain provides the perception. It's all the same to your brain till it gets to the part of your brain that says, oh, that's Beethoven's Ninth, or that's Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. Only your brain knows that information. So how does it make your way to the brain? Now, I want you to remember that cochlear nerve that I talked about just a minute ago, and I'm going to show you where that cochlear nerve comes in. So here's the cochlear nerve coming in, that same green color, and going to a part in the brain stem, which is right behind your neck. And when it gets in there, it splits. Part of it goes to one side and part of the signal goes to the other. Now let's draw your ears up here. There's an ear and there's an ear. Now remember, you have two ears. So the same thing is happening over here. Okay? Now the sound goes from there up each side, and then it goes to this other part of your brain in the middle. It splits again. And so the signal has now split twice. And then when it gets to the thalamus, it heads from there right to the auditory cortex. And this is where the pedal meets the metal, right in the auditory cortex. It isn't until it gets to the auditory cortex that the signal is interpreted to be music. So up to this point, it's just nothing except signals. This is the part that says this is music. So I want to get rid of these now. And I'm going to go on to the next video.
How do neural signals travel from hair cells in the organ of Corti to the primary auditory cortex? Well, let's examine the ascending auditory pathway. Why ascend? Ask. Well, ascending means information goes to the brain, while descending means information goes from the brain elsewhere. Inner hair cells in the organ of Corti are connected to type 1 spiral ganglion neurons, whose axons represent 95% of the cochlear nerve.
Please try to ignore all the techno talk here. Just try to get the big picture of how things are moving around.
So firstly, signals travel along the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nuclei in the brainstem on the ipsilateral side. Ipsilateral means same side, and contralateral means opposite side. Here's where it starts to get a little complicated. Most auditory information crosses over. However, each cerebral hemisphere processes stimuli from both the ipsi and contralateral sides. This is advantageous for two reasons. First, if you get brain damage in one hemisphere of the brain, your sense of hearing doesn't suffer much. Second, as humans, we process some pretty complicated sounds, like those involved in speech, And getting input from both ears to both hemispheres allows for more processing potential. Anyway, back to the ascending auditory pathway. Our information is at its first stop, the cochlear nucleus. From here, most of the neurons cross over to the contralateral side. This is the primary pathway that the information takes. However, there is also a secondary pathway in which some neurons stay on the ipsilateral side. In both cases, the neuron synapse in the superior olivary complex, which is also in the brainstem. The signal continues to be relayed along the lateral lemniscus to the inferior colliculus in the midbrain. From the inferior colliculus, the information is relayed to the medial geniculate nucleus of the thalamus. Most of the neurons taking this trip stay on the ipsilateral side. However, some cross over. Finally, the information continues into the auditory cortex. The auditory cortex is tucked into the lateral sulcus. The auditory core region contains the primary auditory cortex, or A1, which is organized tonotopically. In other words, it's arranged by frequency. There are actually tuned neurons that respond only to specific frequencies, and they are arranged in a tonotopic map. How cool is that?
So that's two things about your brain and your ability to hear in which an organ is arranged tonotopically. Your cochlea is arranged tonotopically by frequency, and your auditory cortex is arranged tonotopically by frequency. So I just have a couple more slides with commentary on your brain on music. This comes from a compilation, having watched probably 10 videos and read some journal articles. So this is just some information bites about your brain on music. Listening to music, lyrics are processed on the left hemisphere and melody is processed in the right hemisphere. How do we know this? Magnetic resonance imaging and PET scanning. It turns out that musicians are better at tracking the pitch and cadence of speech than non-musicians, even in a foreign language they don't speak, such as Mandarin. I watched this, it was weird. They have fMRIs of musicians doing this. Listening to music uses many different parts of the brain, but playing a musical instrument uses every part of the brain. Playing a musical instrument is the brain's equivalent of a full body workout. Music has been shown to activate the same areas of the brain as altruistic behaviors. So playing music is kind of like volunteering. Women tend to hear high-pitched sounds better than men, and men tend to hear low-pitched sounds better than women. Musicians tend to have better connectivity between the two halves of their brain than non-musicians. That superhighway of white axons that goes between the two halves is called the corpus callosum, and musicians tend to have better integrated brain halves. Listening to music stimulates dopamine in the brain's reward center in exactly the same way as cocaine, sex, food, love, and chocolate, which means listening to music can be addictive. Anticipation of the part of a musical score has been shown to stimulate dopamine even before that part happens. Just like anticipating shopping, gambling, sex, or chocolate eventually will cause the release of dopamine. And so when you're sitting there waiting for that incredible part of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, the dopamine is just pouring into your brain. Playing music with other people stimulates the brain to produce oxytocin, the emotional bonding hormone. Just like a mother with her baby or falling in love, oxytocin is the bonding chemical. Listening for specific instruments in a musical piece activates different areas than listening to the piece holistically. So if they say to the musician, listen for the guitar, listen for the bass, listen for the flute, that will activate different parts of the brain than if they say to the musician, now just sit back and listen to the whole piece. Child musicians have been shown to have better vocabulary skills, fine motor skills, auditory discrimination, math skills, and nonverbal reasoning involving relationships and patterns. And that makes perfect sense because notes are patterns. The effects of childhood musical training in the brain persist into adulthood. So getting piano lessons young is so important, or musical lessons. Music can actually rearrange the brain's tonotopic frequency map. The way the brain is mapped to frequency can vary depending on what you do. If you're tuning for a specific thing, like the sound of your phone beeping to tell you you have a message in your texting, your brain will develop a tonotopic frequency recognition for that particular tone. Music can do the same thing to your brain. Playing music can actually change other areas of the brain that you would not expect. The motor area, the prefrontal cortex administrative section, the cerebellum motor coordination section, and the corpus callosum the halves super connecting highway. And the last is seniors who play a musical instrument are more resistant to cognitive and memory decline with age. So it is never too late to take up music. And I'll leave you with this one thought by Confucius. Music produces a kind of pleasure with which human nature cannot do without. So thank you very much for your kind attention. I hope that if you have any questions, feel free to stay. I will stay if you would like. Otherwise, if you have to run off, I completely understand that. So if anybody has any questions, Rodney, if you want to field whatever chat questions there are, I'm happy to.
Sure, and thank you. There are a few questions in the chat window. I don't know if you want to open that or if you want me to
Just did,
read them
yeah.
for you.
Yes, if the medium itself, Frank asks, does pressure like temperature affect the speed of sound in a medium? Yes. So if you change the pressure, the atmospheric pressure, the pressure in the a chamber, that will affect the speed of sound. It will also affect the quality of the sound, the timbre as well. Yes, changing musical instruments like pianos changes the timbre. If you happen to have one of those pianos like I do, in which you can change from the concert grand, the EX concert grand to the SX concert grand, you can actually detect a difference in the timbre between two grand pianos. Sometimes you can hear overtones. People that are really good trained musicians, Frank asks, can you hear overtones? And yes, sometimes people who are super good trained musicians can hear overtones. And people that are good sound mixers, you know, those giant soundboards people sit in front of when they mix audio tapes, they are very good at hearing overtones. That's how they mix sound so perfectly. By the way, I wanted to let you know, yes, Ann Nielsen, this is recorded and it will be made available on the LLI site. You are free to, actually you're free to do whatever you want with that recording. Send it off to your friends. Please let us know if you decide to post it somewhere, but send it off to your friends and enjoy it and watch it again. What part of the brain serves as the beat calculator? Oh, that's a super good question. That has to be a complex interaction between the prefrontal cortex, the administrative side, and part of the brain that detects the sound, the auditory cortex. So beat detection or rhythm detection is a different part of the brain than frequency detection. I know people who are very good at frequency and not so good at beats. And I know people who are really good at beats, but not so good at frequency. They're not the same thing. So detecting rhythm and detecting frequency are not necessarily mutually inclusive. Great question. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask?
And I did leave a comment in the chat window, but people are not seeing that. You do have your microphones enabled. You can unmute and speak directly to Ann without using the chat window.
Hey, this is Frank. I had asked put a question in the chat room about in fact, I'm fascinated by watching the strings vibrate on the guitar, I guess. It looks like a lateral movement. But as you pointed out, the sound radiates in all directions. How does that work? How do you go from a
Right.
lateral movement to something
Because
that goes out?
the sound is what's called a transverse wave. The direction of propagation of the wave is different than the direction of the force. Well, yeah, it's a longitudinal wave. The direction of propagation and the direction of the wave displacement are opposite. So it's a transverse wave. So the wave is transverse up and down, but the direction of propagation is outward.
Hmm.
It's a property of a wave to be either transverse or longitudinal.
But it's not what should I say, linear? I mean, the one video pointed out that the sound was spherical.
The pattern of the sound distribution after you pluck is not unidirectional. It does go everywhere, unless of course you block. If you block part of the
Right.
transmission zone, that part will be impeded. But assuming there's no blockage of the transmission zone, a wave will emanate spherically. The wave will emanate spherically.
That's fascinating, in and of itself. So,
And
thank
Yes.
I'm just curious, what kind of music do you like to play on the guitar?
I kind of have a variety. I play the guitar, the ukulele, the bass, and the piano. I play all kinds of stuff. I play a lot of great tunes with my uke group. I love my uke group, the Shenandoah Valley Ukulele Players. That's mostly popular music. I also play popular music on the guitar, but I play classical and compose classical on the piano.
Okay, thank
So
you.
I have an instrument for classical. That's my serious instrument. And then my instruments for fun are the ukulele and bass.
And this is Frank. I'm going to have to leave. It's been a fantastic presentation again.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
all.
much.
If anyone has to leave, feel free. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I don't want to keep anybody. So feel free if you need to take off. But if you have questions, feel free to continue asking.
And as always, a revelation. Thank you so much for doing this. And I learned so much from your classes. It's just really something. And now I know I love what I love when I listen to music and how I get the job done.
Making that dopamine flow and
Oh, absolutely.
and
Well,
yes,
I thought it was
the addictive chemical and the happy chemical.
well, I thought it was very interesting when it all led to the thymus gland. Thanks again.
Welcome. Well, thank you again, everyone. If there's no further questions, I'm happy to take off. Let you all have a great day and a great rest of this challenging period. And if you have any other things you want to talk about, feel free to drop me an email, and we'd be glad to chat offline.
And thank you again from LLI for doing such a great job curating this information, sharing your love of music and your scientific expertise with us. We appreciate everything you do. And as you mentioned, for anyone that missed part of the presentation or would like to revisit any portion of it, this and all previous Zoomtime Knowledge presentations are recorded and available at our website at www.jmu.edu/LLI. Thank you,
Thank you, everyone, for your kind comments in the chat. I really appreciate the positive reinforcement.